August 2nd, 1876, Deadwood, Dakota Territory. Inside a crowded saloon. One of the most feared gunmen in America was playing poker. His name was Wild Bill Hickok. For years, he had survived gunfights, outlaws, violence, dangerous towns, and enemies who knew exactly who he was. Wild Bill had spent most of his life understanding one simple rule: never let danger get behind you. But that afternoon, he had no choice. The only empty seat at the poker table left his back exposed. He didn't like it. He reportedly asked another player to switch places. The man refused. So Wild Bill sat down and continued playing. He had no idea. A man named Jack McCall was about to walk through the saloon door. McCall moved quietly behind him. Wild Bill never saw him. Then, a gunshot exploded through the room. Wild Bill Hickok collapsed, dead, almost instantly, in his hand. According to the famous legend, were 2 black aces and 2 black eights, a poker hand that would forever become known as the dead man's hand. But the killer's story was far from over, because Jack McCall was arrested, put on trial, and somehow walked free. He thought he had beaten the law. He thought killing Wild Bill Hickok had made him untouchable. Then he started talking, and that was the mistake that eventually destroyed him. Before he became a legend, his name was James Butler Hickok. He was born in Illinois in 1837. America was changing. The frontier was expanding west. New towns were appearing. Railroads were growing. And beyond the established cities, there were enormous areas where law and order could be uncertain. Hickok became part of that world. Over the years, he worked in different roles: scout, lawman, guide, gambler, and eventually, one of the most famous gunfighters in America. But there is something important to understand. The legend of Wild Bill became larger than the real man. Newspapers loved his stories. Writers exaggerated his victories. Rumors traveled from town to town. Some stories claimed he had killed enormous numbers of men. Those numbers were almost certainly exaggerated, but Hickok did have a reputation for surviving violent confrontations. And by the time he reached Deadwood, his name was already famous. Maybe too famous, because when everyone knows your name, everyone knows when you're vulnerable too. In 1876, gold had transformed the Black Hills. People came looking for fortune: miners, gamblers, merchants, outlaws, men willing to risk everything for gold. And almost overnight, Deadwood became one of the most dangerous boom towns in the American West. The town attracted opportunity, but opportunity attracted crime. And crime attracted men like Wild Bill Hickok. He arrived in Deadwood in July 1876. He had only been there a few weeks, but he was already recognizable. Wild Bill was a celebrity in a place filled with dangerous people. He gambled, played cards, and tried to earn money. But there was another problem. His eyesight had been declining. For a man whose reputation depended partly on his ability to see danger before danger reached him, that was terrifying. The gunfighter was getting older. His reflexes could not protect him forever, and the frontier was changing. Wild Bill Hickok had survived by being faster than his enemies. But one day, speed would not matter, because the man who killed him would not face him from the front. Jack McCall was very different. He wasn't a legendary lawman. He wasn't a famous gunfighter. And before August 1876, few people would have imagined his name would become connected forever to Wild Bill Hickok. But McCall was in Deadwood, and according to one account of events, he had lost heavily at cards shortly before the killing. Wild Bill reportedly gave him some money for food, a gesture that may have embarrassed McCall. There are different accounts of what motivated him. Later, McCall claimed he had killed Wild Bill because Hickok had murdered his brother, but historians have questioned that explanation. Other accounts point toward drunken resentment or anger connected to the previous day's poker game. The truth is, the exact motive has never been completely settled, and that uncertainty makes the story even stranger, because one of America's most famous murders still leaves us asking one question: why? Why did Jack McCall walk into that saloon? Why did he choose Wild Bill? And why did he shoot him from behind? August 2nd, late afternoon, Wild Bill walked into Nuttall and Mann's saloon. The poker game was already underway. He joined the table. Then he noticed something. The available seat was wrong. Wild Bill had reportedly developed a habit. Whenever possible, he wanted his back against the wall. He wanted to face the room. He wanted to see anyone approaching him. It was a survival habit, a habit built over years of danger. But the only available chair left his back exposed. Wild Bill asked another player to change seats. The player refused, and that tiny decision may have changed history. Wild Bill sat down. His back was toward the door, and he began to play. Think about that. A man who had survived years of violence finally found himself sitting in the one position he hated most, unable to see what was behind him. The cards were dealt. The saloon continued as normal. Men talked. Glasses moved across tables. Coins changed hands. Nobody knew that within minutes, Wild Bill Hickok would be dead. Then, Jack McCall entered the saloon. He moved toward the poker table. Wild Bill was facing away. McCall came up behind him. Accounts of his exact words vary, but the gunshot did not. McCall fired. The bullet struck Wild Bill in the back of the head. Wild Bill died immediately. The room exploded into chaos. One moment, one of America's most famous gunfighters was playing cards. The next, he was lying dead, not defeated in a famous duel, not killed while defending a town, not facing an enemy across a dusty street, shot from behind at a poker table. The man who had spent years watching for danger never saw the final danger coming. Then people looked at the cards. According to the famous account that became part of American legend, Wild Bill had 2 black aces and 2 black eights. A 5th card has been described differently in later retellings. But the 2 pairs became famous. Black aces, black eights. From that day forward, poker players would know the combination as the dead man's hand. Whether every detail of the card arrangement can be proved beyond doubt is another question. But the association became inseparable from Wild Bill Hickok. More than a century later, people still hear the words, "Dead man's hand," and think of the gunfighter who was shot from behind in Deadwood. His final poker game became part of American mythology. Jack McCall tried to escape, but he was captured. And now, the killer of Wild Bill Hickok would face justice, or so everyone thought. Deadwood was still a rough frontier settlement. The legal system was not operating like a modern American courtroom. McCall was put before an informal miners' court. He told the court his version of the story. He claimed Wild Bill had killed his brother. The story influenced the men judging him, and unbelievably, Jack McCall was acquitted. He walked free. Imagine that! One of the most famous gunfighters in America had been murdered. His killer had been captured, put on trial, and released. For Jack McCall, it must have felt like victory. He had killed Wild Bill Hickok and survived the consequences. But freedom can make foolish people overconfident, and McCall made a mistake. He talked. McCall left Deadwood. He traveled west, and according to historical accounts, he bragged about killing Wild Bill. He told people what he had done. He repeated the story again and again. He wanted recognition. Maybe he wanted people to fear him. Maybe he wanted the world to know that he was the man who had killed Wild Bill Hickok. But bragging about murder has consequences. Eventually, McCall was arrested again. This time, the situation was different. The earlier miners' court did not have the same legal standing as a proper court. McCall was taken to Yankton in the Dakota Territory. He was formally prosecuted. And this time, there would be no easy escape. The man who thought he had beaten justice was about to discover that his first trial had not ended the story. McCall was indicted. Witnesses testified. The murder was examined again. And this time, the jury found him guilty. Jack McCall was sentenced to death. The man who had walked free after his first trial was now waiting to be executed. He had gone from believing himself untouchable to sitting in a cell. And on March 1st, 1877, Jack McCall was hanged. Less than a year after killing Wild Bill Hickok, his own story was over. Justice had finally reached him. Not through a revenge duel, not through one of Wild Bill's friends, but through the legal system. The man who had shot someone from behind was eventually caught by the consequences he believed he had escaped. Wild Bill Hickok had spent only a few weeks in Deadwood, but he became one of the town's most famous names. He was buried there. His friend, Colorado Charlie Utter, paid for his burial plot. Over the years, Deadwood continued to tell his story. The gunfighter, the gambler, the scout, the lawman, and the man who survived so many dangerous encounters only to die during a quiet card game. That might be the strangest part of all. Wild Bill Hickok had lived through the exact kind of life most people would never survive. Then his story ended because of one chair, one exposed back, man with a gun, and 1 second of opportunity. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's a story about the limits of reputation. Wild Bill Hickok was famous, feared, experienced. He knew danger, but nobody can stay alert forever. And sometimes, the danger that destroys you doesn't come from the person you fear most. Jack McCall wasn't remembered as the greatest gunslinger. He didn't defeat Wild Bill in a legendary duel. He simply waited until Wild Bill couldn't see him, then pulled the trigger, and for a brief moment, McCall escaped justice. But he made one fatal mistake. He believed getting away with something was the same as being safe. So he talked, he bragged, he kept telling people what he had done, until, eventually, the law caught up with him. Wild Bill Hickok spent his life surviving danger. He faced gunfighters, outlaws, violent towns, and the chaos of the American frontier. But on August 2nd, 1876, his final enemy came from behind. Jack McCall killed him, then escaped justice, at least for a while. But 7 months later, McCall was dead too, executed for the murder he thought he had gotten away with. And Wild Bill, his name became legend. His final poker hand became legend. And even today, the words, dead man's hand, still bring people back to that saloon in Deadwood. One question remains, do you think Jack McCall got justice or karma? And if you had been sitting at that poker table, would you have switched seats with Wild Bill? Tell us in the comments. If you enjoyed this true historical story of betrayal, murder, and justice, subscribe to the Karma chapters, because sometimes you can escape the law once, but you can't always escape the consequences.